Pelican Bay Supermax Survival Food Challenge. What it's really like. The Loaf test. The cell was silent, except for the sound of a spoon scraping metal. Inmate Marcus Red Daniels sat on the cold floor of his Pelican Bay Supermax cell, staring at a gray prison tray that held one thing: a square of something that looked like compressed mud. No seasoning. No color. Just a brick of punishment. The guards called it the loaf. The inmates called it the survival test. 3 days in the SHU had already broken tougher men, but Marcus wasn't going to give the guards the satisfaction. He'd heard the rules. If you refuse to eat the loaf, you're not getting anything else. If you complain, you stay on it longer. His stomach twisted as he tore off a piece. The taste hit him: sour beans, raw flour, carrots, maybe even mystery meat, mashed and baked into a single disgusting block. His throat burned as he forced it down. He looked up at the small slit of light that came through the door and muttered, "They think this is food? This is torture." But what he didn't know yet was that this wasn't the worst of it. In Pelican Bay, the food could break you before the isolation ever did. Because inside this prison, the food itself was part of the punishment. The camera zooms out, from Marcus's trembling hands to the echoing halls of the security housing unit. The metal doors stretch endlessly, a maze of suffering designed not just to confine, but to crush the human will. Then, suddenly, a loud bang. A guard yells. Marcus looks toward the sound. Something was happening in the next cell block, something violent. But Marcus couldn't see it. All he could do was listen. And from that moment he knew, this place would do anything to test how far a man could go before he breaks. The taste of control. 3 days earlier, Marcus had just arrived at Pelican Bay State Prison, transferred from Folsom after a fight that landed 2 men in the infirmary. They said Pelican Bay was different. No sunlight. No yard. No noise. Just 4 walls, 1 door, and a slot for food. When the steel door closed behind him for the first time, he didn't feel like an inmate anymore. He felt like an experiment. "You'll get used to it," the guard had said with a smirk. 3 meals a day, if you can call him that. Marcus wasn't new to prison life, he'd done time before. But Pelican Bay's SHU security housing unit was another world. There were no cafeteria lines, no chatter, no smells of food from the kitchen. Meals came on trays, slid through a steel slot like offerings to a caged animal. The first meal seemed fine: rice, beans, a small apple. Cold but edible. The second meal was the same but smaller. By the third, the portions had shrunk again. Then came the loaf. He didn't understand why, until he heard 2 guards talking outside his door. He cursed at Officer Miller during cell check. One said, "Put him on the loaf for 7 days." That's when it clicked. The food wasn't just punishment, it was a message. They controlled everything, even what went into your body. The first bite. The first loaf came that night. It was wrapped in wax paper, already cold. The smell hit him before he even opened it: sour, stale, heavy. He bit it, gagged, and spat it back out. The texture was thick, gritty, like raw oatmeal mixed with glue. He yelled for a guard. No one came. Only silence. He tried again, smaller bites this time, sipping water from his plastic cup. He forced it down, piece by piece, until his body accepted it out of pure survival instinct. He lay down after, dizzy, his stomach turning. That night he dreamed of fried chicken, not because he missed it but because his body was begging for salt. The Whisper Network. By morning, Marcus started to understand the quiet code of the SHU. Every inmate had a story about the loaf. They whispered through vents and drain pipes, the only way to talk between cells. "You eat it or you die," one voice said. "Don't throw it out. They'll write you up." "It's not about food, bro. It's about control." He listened. Every whisper painted the same picture. The food challenge wasn't a challenge for entertainment. It was a battle for sanity. Marcus decided he'd beat it. He'd survive the loaf. He'd outlast the punishment. But his body had other plans. By day 3, his stomach ached, his vision blurred, and his thoughts grew foggy. He started hallucinating the smell of coffee, something he hadn't had in years. And that's when it happened. A sound from the vent. A voice he didn't know. "They're watching who eats it," the voice said. "They're testing us." Marcus froze. Testing? For what? Before he could ask again, a new tray slid through the slot, and this time there was something off about it. The loaf looked darker, denser. And the smell? Burnt. Metallic. He lifted it closer, suspicious. Something wasn't right. He looked through the slit, saw the guard staring directly at him, smiling. That smile said everything. This wasn't about feeding him. This was about breaking him. Marcus clenched his fist, then did the unthinkable. He grabbed the loaf and threw it straight back through the slot. The guard's grin disappeared. An alarm sounded. The punishment for refusing food was just beginning. The Hunger Game. Alarm blaring. Boots thundering down the corridor. Marcus stood frozen, staring at the steel door. The tray he'd just thrown clattered against the concrete outside his cell, splattering crumbs of that gray, foul-smelling loaf. Daniels. Stepped back from the door. The voice was sharp, commanding. He didn't move. His fists clenched tighter. Then came the sound he dreaded, metal keys turning. The door cracked open just enough for two guards to rush in, armored and ready. One grabbed him by the arm, the other slammed him against the wall. The impact echoed like a gunshot through the empty hall. "You think you can throw food at us, tough guy? You don't eat, you don't move." Marcus tried to speak, but a punch to his stomach silenced him. His breath caught, pain blooming like fire under his ribs. The guards didn't need to say more. They were sending a message: refuse the food and you'll pay for it. They dragged him out of his cell and down the long corridor, that endless gray tunnel lined with identical steel doors. The lights above flickered like dying stars. Each step echoed the same word in Marcus's head: control, control, control. The adjustment cell. They threw him into a smaller room, colder, darker, emptier. No bed. No sink. Just a drain in the middle of the floor. "Welcome to your new suite," one guard sneered. "You'll get your meals right here, if you can keep them down." The door slammed shut. Marcus was alone again. Only this time there was no tray, no water, nothing. Hours passed, maybe half a day. He couldn't tell time in here. There were no windows, no clocks. Just the sound of distant footsteps and dripping water. His stomach twisted in knots, crying out for anything, even that horrible loaf. He began to understand why inmates broke so easily here. Pelican Bay wasn't built to rehabilitate. It was built to erase you. By the next morning, or what he thought was morning, the slot opened. A tray slid in. Same loaf. Same shape. But something new, a note scribbled on napkin paper tucked underneath. Marcus hesitated before picking it up. The handwriting was rough but readable. They watch who resists. Don't give them a reason. No name. No signature. Just that message. He tore off a piece of the loaf, stared at it like an enemy, then swallowed. It tasted even worse than before. Dense, salty, metallic. He gagged but forced it down. Not because he wanted to, but because he realized survival here wasn't about comfort. It was about endurance. The voices through the walls. By day 2 the whispers returned. Faint, echoing through the vents. "Yo, new guy, you still alive? They got you on the loaf, huh? Don't let it mess with your head. That's how they win." Marcus pressed his ear to the cold wall, whispering back. "How long they keep you on this? Depends. Some a week. Some a month. If you snap early they win." Then the voice laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "We call it the Hunger Game. Eat too much you get sick. Eat too little you starve. Either way you lose." That line stuck in Marcus's mind like a knife. He realized this was the real challenge. Not about eating or refusing, but finding a balance between staying alive and staying sane. Every day became a test. He'd wake up to the same tray, the same loaf, the same silence. He chewed slowly, pretending it was real food. Sometimes he'd imagine it was cornbread from his grandma's kitchen, warm, buttery, soft. He'd even close his eyes to smell it. But when he opened them he was still in Pelican Bay. Alone, cold, and half-starved. The breaking point. On the 5th day Marcus felt something shift. Not in the prison, in himself. He caught his reflection in the tiny mirror beside the toilet. Eyes sunken. Skin pale. Lips cracked. He looked less like a man, more like a ghost of one. Then the smell hit him again, stronger than before. That same loaf. But this time his body rejected it immediately. He vomited on the floor, dizzy, trembling. He crawled back to the wall, breathing hard. The vent voice came again, quieter this time. "You gotta stay up, man. That's how they break you." Marcus leaned his head back, whispering, "Maybe I'm already broken." The silence that followed was worse than any words. He didn't remember passing out, only waking up to cold water splashing on his face. A guard stood over him, smirking. "You wanted to play tough? Now look at you." They dragged him to the hallway again, the world spinning around him. He caught glimpses, trays stacked, other inmates' eyes peering through narrow slits, shadows moving in rhythm with their own hunger. Then, the voice of the same officer from before. "If he won't eat, he'll drink." He saw it, a rubber feeding tube coiled like a snake in the guard's hand. Marcus's heart dropped. This was the next phase. If you couldn't handle the loaf, they'd feed you through a tube, a forced feeding. He screamed, tried to resist, but his body was too weak. 2 guards held him down as the tube slid through his nose, burning every inch of the way down. Tears ran from his eyes as liquid slop poured into his stomach. It wasn't food. It was humiliation in liquid form. "You'll eat one way or another," the guard said, removing the tube. "Welcome to Pelican Bay." Marcus lay there, shaking, coughing, feeling every bit of his humanity slipping away. He realized now why the other inmates whispered through the vents, why they called it the Hunger Game. It wasn't about food. It was about control through suffering. And as he stared at the ceiling, his mind made one silent promise. "I'll find a way out of this place. No matter what." But deep inside, another question echoed, one that would haunt him for days. What happens when the food stops being punishment and becomes survival itself? The body fights back. The next morning, Marcus woke up to the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the dull ache in his stomach. His throat burned from the feeding tube, his lips were swollen, and every muscle in his body begged for rest. He had lost track of time. There were no days or nights anymore, only feedings, trays, and footsteps. But something inside him had changed. The fear was gone. What replaced it was anger. He sat up slowly, staring at the door. The slot opened and another gray tray slid in. Same loaf. Same smell. Same silence. He picked it up, but this time he didn't eat it. He examined it carefully, the edges, the color, the moisture. He realized something. The loaf was slightly different each time. Some were heavier, some dry, some wet. He started to study it. Like it was a clue. If they were testing him, he'd test them back. The science of survival. Marcus tore a small piece and pressed it between his fingers. It crumbled. He sniffed it, smelled faint beans, flour, and something else. A chemical. Maybe disinfectant? Maybe not. He couldn't be sure. He remembered something an old cellmate once said back at Folsom. "They don't gotta hit you to break you. They just gotta mess with your food." He decided he'd play their game differently. He started saving parts of the loaf, hiding them under his mattress, behind the toilet, anywhere the guards wouldn't check. Over time the mold started to grow, green, blue, black. He'd mark the days by the color of the mold. That's how he knew a week had passed. His body, though, was falling apart. The cramps got worse. His vision blurred. Sometimes his hands shook so bad he could barely hold his cup of water. But even through the pain he smiled to himself. Because he was still thinking. And as long as he could think, he was still alive. The trade. On the 8th day, Marcus heard a whisper through the vent, the same voice from before. "You still breathing, Red?" "Barely," Marcus said, his voice weak. "Good. 'Cause I got something for you." There was a pause, then a faint scratching sound. Marcus crawled toward the vent. Something slid through, a small paper packet folded tight. He opened it. Inside was a handful of instant coffee granules. It looked like gold. "How'd you get this?" Marcus asked. "You don't want to know," the voice said. "Mix it with hot water. It'll keep you up. Keep your head straight." Marcus had no kettle, no stove. But he did have hot water from the sink, barely warm but enough. He stirred the coffee in his plastic cup, watched the water turn brown, then took a sip. It was bitter. It was perfect. For the first time in days, his heart kicked back into rhythm. The caffeine hit like a lifeline. He could think clearly again. That night, he wrote a message on a piece of napkin from his tray, folded it, and pushed it back through the vent. "Thank you. What's your name?" "They call me Ghost," came the reply. "You keep your head up, Red. The game don't end till somebody breaks." Marcus smiled weakly. "Then I'm gonna make sure it's not me." The experiment. By now, Marcus had figured out the guard's pattern. Meals came at the same time, same pace. They watched him through the tiny glass window. Every time he ate, they wrote something down on their clipboards. He realized he wasn't just being punished. He was being observed. One day, a different tray arrived. Same loaf, but a small carton of milk beside it. He hadn't seen milk in weeks. He sniffed it, smelled fine. But his instinct screamed no. He poured a drop onto the floor. The liquid fizzed slightly, just enough to make him suspicious. He didn't drink it. Later, he heard screams echoing down the corridor. Someone else, maybe Ghost, had gotten the same tray. And this time that person had drunk the milk. The screams didn't stop for a long time. Marcus's jaw clenched. He realized the food test wasn't random anymore. It was escalating. He stared at the next tray, same loaf, different texture. Maybe they were adjusting ingredients, seeing who could handle what. This wasn't just a punishment, it was experimentation. That night, he pressed his ear to the vent and whispered, "Ghost, you still there?" No answer. Ghost. Silence. He waited for hours. Nothing. And in that silence, Marcus understood the truth. Ghost had failed the challenge. He was alone again. The defiance. The next morning, Marcus decided he was done playing defense. When the guard slid the tray through the slot, he looked right into that small window, stared back without blinking. You want me to eat this? Fine. But I ain't breaking. He took a piece of the loaf, tore it in half and shoved it in his mouth, never breaking eye contact. He chewed slowly then swallowed. See that? He said loud enough for the cameras. Still standing. The guard sneered but said nothing. For the first time, Marcus felt like he had control, even if just for a second. He realized something powerful in that moment. They could control his food, his light, his time, but they couldn't control his choice to survive. Even if it meant eating the same foul loaf every single day. He whispered to himself, if this is the game, I'll win it. The blood in the water. But just as he began to feel stronger, things took a darker turn. That night, as he lay on the concrete, he felt sharp pain in his gut, deep, twisting, unbearable. He tried to sit up, but the pain doubled. He looked down and saw blood, faint streaks, dark and red, on his shirt. Something was wrong inside him. The loaf, the chemicals, the forced feedings, it was catching up. He banged on the door for help. Hey, I need a doctor. No one came. Minutes passed. Then hours. The pain grew sharper. He curled up, clutching his stomach, whispering, not like this. Not here. Then footsteps. The slot opened. A guard looked in, his face cold. Still hungry, Daniels? He asked. Then he tossed another loaf through the slot and walked away. The tray landed beside the pool of blood. He stared at that loaf one last time, then whispered to himself, you can break my body, but not my mind. As the lights flickered above him, the scene fades out, leaving only the echo of a man's breath, and the question of how much longer he could last. The experiment unfolds. When Marcus woke up again, he wasn't sure how much time had passed. His stomach pain had dulled to a low, constant burn, and his throat felt like sandpaper. He was alive, barely. But his mind? Sharper than ever. He looked at the cold gray tray on the floor, the same loaf, same smell. But this time something was off. There was a small sticker on the tray's corner, white with a number. Batch 38. He frowned. He had never noticed any markings before. Why label a punishment meal? Then he remembered, the guards writing notes, the clipboards, the small cameras above the slot. This wasn't random. He wasn't being punished anymore. He was being tested. The pattern. Marcus started to observe everything, time, smells, even the texture of the bread. He realized certain trays came with slight variations. Some made his stomach twist instantly, others just made him weak. He began to document the reactions in his mind, building a mental chart like an inmate scientist trapped in hell. Batch 35 made him dizzy. Batch 36 caused nausea. Batch 37 gave him strange dreams. Now Batch 38 sat before him, glowing under the flickering fluorescent light. He tore a corner and tasted it. Nothing unusual at first, bland, chalky, dry. But an hour later, his skin itched. His heart raced. Something was inside it. He pressed his back against the wall and whispered, they're testing chemicals. He looked up at the small glass camera, barely visible. Behind that lens, someone was watching. Taking notes. Probably smiling. The thought sent a chill through his spine. They weren't just feeding him, they were experimenting on him. The hidden hand. That night, the vent whisper came back. But it wasn't Ghost. The voice was deeper, older, calm. You figured it out, didn't you? Who are you? Marcus whispered. Name's Kodo. Been here longer than you've been alive. They do this every few years, test reactions. They call it behavioral conditioning. Marcus's pulse spiked. Behavioral what? They watch how long it takes a man to break under food control. Loaf's the tool. Pain's the study. Marcus felt sick. You're saying, this is a program? Yep. Not official. But they track data, who eats, who refuses, who goes violent. It's all about control. He leaned back, eyes wide. So it wasn't punishment. It was psychological warfare, wrapped in a meal. Why us? Marcus asked. 'Cause we're the ones no one's watching, Kodo replied. No cameras for the world. Just these walls. Marcus felt something heavy settle in his chest. Not fear, not anger. Determination. If they were watching, he'd make sure they saw something they didn't expect. He'd stop being their experiment. He'd turn the experiment on them. The plan. The next morning he got his tray early, batch 39. He didn't touch it. Instead he waited. When the next guard came by for rounds, Marcus started talking, calm, steady, polite. "Hey officer," he said. "Appreciate the food. Real nourishing. You being smart, Daniels?" "Nah man. Just grateful. This stuff grows on you." The guard looked through the slit, suspicious. "You eaten it all?" "Every crumb," Marcus lied. "It's the best thing on the menu." The guard smirked and moved on. Marcus smiled too, because he just discovered a new trick. They weren't watching constantly. They relied on reports. That meant he had small windows of freedom. And in those moments he could fight back. He began hiding portions of the loaf, not to eat later but to send messages. Using the napkins and water, he mixed the moldy crumbs into a dark paste, then wrote on the back of his tray paper, "We know what you're doing." Then he pressed it flat under the loaf and slid the tray back out. It was a message not to the guards, but to whoever was running the program. The unseen faces behind the glass. The retaliation. By the next day things changed. The light stayed on all night. The air vents blew colder. And when his new tray arrived, it wasn't a loaf, it was a packet of liquid, sealed and labeled nutritional compound test E. He laughed bitterly. They dropped the disguise. The experiment was in full view now. He opened it and smelled it, chemical, artificial, metallic. He closed it again and whispered, "Not today." Hours passed. No one came. No water. No words. He sat there staring at the packet as the air grew colder. His lips cracked. His head pounded. But he refused. By midnight he could barely see straight. He lay on the floor, dizzy, hearing voices in his head, the kind that whisper your fears back to you. "You'll starve before they stop. They'll forget your name. You're nothing." He closed his eyes. "I'm still here," he whispered. "You can test me all you want. I'm still here." The tape. Then, something unexpected. The next morning, instead of food, the slot slid open and a cassette tape fell onto the floor. Old school. Black. No label. He stared at it, confused. No player, no instructions. Then a voice echoed from the corridor, the same guard who'd smirked before. "They want you to listen, Daniels." A moment later, a faint speaker clicked on in the ceiling. Static, then a woman's voice. Cold, professional. Subject 14B, Marcus Daniels. Reaction to compound test E, refusal after 12 hours. Marked high resistance. Continued deprivation cycle. Marcus froze. He wasn't even a name to them, just a subject. The voice continued. Observe for signs of aggression or collapse. Escalate dosage if resistance continues. He felt rage surge through him. He screamed at the ceiling, pounding the walls. "You're killing people in here. You hear me?" His voice echoed through the block, bouncing off steel and concrete. Then silence again. He slumped to the floor, exhausted, shaking. Tears mixed with sweat on his face. He had just confirmed the truth. Pelican Bay's food punishment wasn't just cruelty. It was science. Cruel science hidden behind thick walls and bureaucratic silence. And now they knew he knew. As the lights dimmed, Marcus whispered into the vent one last time. "Kodo, you were right. But I'm not done yet." And deep down, as the hum of the cameras filled the air, Marcus began planning something dangerous. Not escape, not violence, but exposure. The Revolt Within. The night after the cassette tape incident, Marcus sat in total darkness. No light. No food. Just the steady hum of the ventilation system, and the pounding rhythm of his heartbeat. He was hungry, exhausted, and trembling. But he was not broken. He whispered to himself, "They think I'm a subject. Let's see how they like being watched." That was when his mind began piecing everything together. The sounds, the footsteps, the guard rotations, even the faint clicks from the cameras. He'd been listening for weeks without realizing it. Now he understood their rhythm. The echo code. Marcus started using sound as his weapon. He waited until the guard's footsteps faded, then tapped lightly on the wall. One long, one short, too quick. The echo bounced down the hall. At first there was no response. Then a faint tap came back. 1, 2, 1. Another inmate, alive, aware, listening. He tried again, tapping in patterns, developing a code through the steel walls. It spread fast. By the next day, the sound of tapping filled the block like invisible conversation. Each code meant something. 1 tap meant, "I'm alive." 2 taps meant food refused. 3 taps meant stay strong. They weren't shouting. They weren't rioting. They were communicating silently. And Pelican Bay's guards couldn't stop it. Marcus had done something no one expected inside the SHU. He'd turned isolation into connection. The hunger pact. By the third day of darkness, the tapping grew organized. Marcus's code spread to every corner of the unit, cell by cell, man by man. They agreed to one thing: no one eats the loaf. If Pelican Bay wanted to run an experiment, they'd get a result they couldn't control. A mass refusal. Marcus leaned against the wall and whispered, "If they see we're not breaking alone, they'll realize we've got more power than they think." He wasn't sure if everyone could hold out. Starvation wasn't a slogan, it was pain. But when the next food trays slid through the slots, not a single sound of chewing came from the halls. Not one tray moved. For the first time, the SHU was united, not in violence but in silence. Hours later, guards walked by, peering through each slit. Their faces showed confusion. Then frustration. One shouted, "Eat your damn food." No one answered. The silence was deafening, a quiet, collective defiance. Marcus smiled weakly. "That's it," he whispered. "We're fighting back." The crackdown. The next morning, the retaliation began. The vents blasted freezing air. The lights blazed bright all night. And the guards came, full riot gear, helmets, batons. They stormed cell by cell, dragging out inmates one by one, forcing feedings, shouting threats. The sound of boots, shouting, and screams echoed like thunder. Marcus stayed still in his corner. When they reached his door, the lead officer stared through the slit. "You started this, didn't you?" Marcus didn't answer. The door opened with a metallic scream. Two guards stormed in, pinning him down. One held the tube, the other restrained his arms. "You think you're smart, Daniels? You think this is a game?" Marcus spat blood and whispered, "No, this is a test." The officer hesitated, that single line hitting deeper than expected. Then, with visible anger, he ordered the tube inserted. But Marcus didn't fight this time. He stared straight ahead, letting them feed him, his eyes locked on the ceiling camera, expression calm, defiant. "Keep watching," he muttered. "See what survival really looks like." The turn. Days passed. The silent protest spread beyond his block. Inmates in other sections began refusing trays too. Word carried through vents, hand signals, mop handles tapping against doors. Pelican Bay's behavioral study was collapsing under its own weight. One morning the alarms blared again. But this time it wasn't for punishment, it was panic. Marcus could hear officers yelling in the corridor, papers rustling, doors slamming. Something had changed. Then, a voice over the intercom, not a guard, not a warden. A state inspector. "This facility is now under investigation by the California Department of Corrections Oversight Division. All ongoing behavioral studies are suspended effective immediately." Marcus froze. He looked up at the ceiling camera, still blinking. Someone had talked. Someone outside knew. Maybe one of the guards had leaked it. Maybe the silence had made too much noise. But either way, the experiment was over. The aftermath. 3 days later, the loaf trays stopped. The lights went back to normal. The guards were quieter. No more numbered stickers. No more tests. Marcus was transferred back to the general population wing, not because they wanted to reward him, but because they couldn't risk keeping him where others could follow his lead. When he entered his new cell, he could hear faint laughter from down the tier, not mocking but proud. Whispers of his name traveled through the walls like legend. "That's the dude who beat the loaf. Red Daniels. The one who made him stop." He sat on his bunk, thin, tired, but alive. He stared at his hands, the same ones that had once trembled holding that gray lump of food, and whispered, "I told you I'd win." That night, for the first time in months, a real meal arrived. Rice, chicken, beans. Hot. Seasoned. Normal. He lifted a spoonful, stared at it for a long time, then smiled faintly. "Freedom don't always come with open doors," he said softly. "Sometimes it's just being able to taste real food again. Hunger beyond the walls." Freedom didn't taste the way Marcus imagined. It wasn't sweet. It wasn't peaceful. It was confusing, loud, bright, and fast. When he first stepped out of Pelican Bay after 11 years, the sun hit his eyes like a floodlight. He blinked, disoriented, as if daylight itself were interrogation. People cheered, volunteers, activists, even a camera or two, but their smiles felt like strangers' masks. Marcus had spent over 3,000 days eating in silence. Now every voice around him was noise. The first grocery store. 2 days after his release, Marcus found himself standing inside a grocery store in Crescent City, his first in over a decade. He froze in the bread aisle. Rows of loaves lined the shelves. White, wheat, rye, sourdough. Each one soft, colorful, almost glowing under the fluorescent lights. He picked one up. The plastic crinkled. a sound that triggered something in him. His chest tightened. His mind flashed back to Pelican Bay's trays, to the gray Loaf bricks that broke and crumbled in his hands. A clerk walked up, cheerful. "You okay, sir?" Marcus nodded slowly, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just deciding." He grabbed the softest loaf he could find, held it to his chest, and whispered under his breath. This is real bread. The nightmares." That night he stayed in a halfway house, a narrow room with a single bulb and a creaky bed. He dreamed of the sound of trays sliding, of batch 38, of ghosts whisper through the vent. He woke up sweating, heart pounding, convinced he could smell the loaf. He stumbled to the kitchenette, opened the fridge, and saw slices of bread stacked neatly on a plate. His hands trembled. He grabbed one and tore it apart, breathing heavy, whispering, "It's just bread. It's just bread." But his brain didn't believe it. The trauma had rewired him. Every meal, every smell became a test. He started skipping meals, eating once a day. Part of him still feared the food was part of some experiment. Ghosts in his head. Weeks passed. He got a job at a recycling yard, sorting scrap metal under the sun. The clanging of steel reminded him of cell doors, but he stayed quiet, focused. He didn't talk much to co-workers, except one, an older man named Luis, another ex-con who'd done time in Corcoran. One lunch break, Luis offered him a sandwich. Marcus hesitated. "Go on, man. It's turkey. Real meat." Marcus bit it slowly. The flavor hit him, smoky, salty, alive. For the first time, food didn't feel like control. It felt like choice. Luis noticed the look on his face. "Pelican Bay?" he asked softly. Marcus nodded. "Yeah. Shoo." Luis whistled. "That place changes a man." Marcus stared into the distance. "No, it doesn't change you. It tests what's left of you." The letter. One evening, a plain envelope arrived at the halfway house. No return address. Inside was a folded sheet of lined paper. Handwriting rough, like a man who hadn't used a pen in years. Read. "They shut down the experiment. Some of us made it. Some didn't. They moved me down south. Maybe this letter won't even reach you. But I wanted to say, you taught us how to fight without fighting. They called us subjects. You made us human again. Koto." Marcus sat on the bed, letter shaking in his hands. He smiled, a tired, painful smile. "Koto, you made it." He folded the letter neatly and slipped it inside his worn Bible. That was the first time he'd cried since the SHU. The new fight. Months later, Marcus began speaking at small community centers and ex-offender programs. He'd stand in front of folding chairs and tell his story, not about violence, not about gangs, but about the loaf. He called it, the food that broke men. He told them how it tasted, what it did to the body, how silence could be used as a weapon. Some nights, reporters showed up. They took notes, asked questions. And slowly the word spread. Within a year, a national magazine published an article titled, "The Loaf Experiment, Torture Disguised as Discipline." It featured Marcus's story, his photos, and his quote that went viral. "You can starve a man's stomach, but not his will." Letters poured in, from families, former inmates, even prison staff who said they'd seen it happen and couldn't sleep because of it. The return. One day, Marcus received a call from a documentary filmmaker. They wanted him to return to Pelican Bay, not as an inmate, but as a survivor telling his story on camera. He hesitated. Going back meant reopening the wound. But part of him knew, the story wasn't finished until he faced the walls again. When he arrived, escorted by officials, the guards looked different. Younger, quieter. Some avoided his eyes. The SHU hallways looked the same, though, gray, sterile, eternal. He stopped outside cell 14B, his old cell. He ran his hand along the cold metal. "This box took everything from me," he said quietly. "But it gave me one thing they'll never understand, purpose." The camera zoomed in on his face, no tears, just calm strength. He placed his hand flat against the steel door and whispered, "I forgive you." The legacy. Cut to a montage of news headlines. California bans disciplinary loaf in state prisons. Pelican Bay reforms isolation food policy. Former inmate leads nutrition rights movement. Marcus now volunteers with a nonprofit that advocates for humane treatment inside correctional facilities. He travels across the country, talking about what he calls the psychology of punishment. He stands before audiences of college students, wardens, and journalists saying, "It's easy to forget prisoners are people. But the moment we stop caring about how they live, or what they eat, we stop being human ourselves." Return to Pelican Bay. The van rolled up the long asphalt road toward Pelican Bay under a gray Northern California sky. The fog was so thick it seemed to move with them, swallowing the pine trees one by one. Marcus sat in the back seat, staring at the same razor-wire silhouette he had once seen through a transport bus window years ago. Only this time he wasn't wearing cuffs. He was holding a microphone. He wasn't coming back as an inmate. He was coming back as a witness. The gate opens. When the van stopped at the outer gate, Marcus took a deep breath. The sound of the mechanical locks clicking open made his heart pound. It was the same sound that had haunted his dreams for a decade. A correctional officer approached the van, clipboard in hand. Name? Marcus Daniels. Civilian access. Documentary crew. The guard looked at him for a long second, the kind of look that recognized a face from somewhere but couldn't place it. Then he nodded. Welcome back, Mr. Daniels. The gates clanged open, one after another. The van rolled inside. Marcus whispered under his breath. Back to where it all began. The empty block. They led him to the SHU, the security housing unit, once called the belly of the beast. Now it was mostly empty. Many of the cells stood open, the beds stripped bare, the metal toilets dry and clean. A warden escorted them, explaining how things have changed. We've reduced isolation by more than half, he said. And the loaf? Gone completely. We use balanced meals now. Marcus listened but didn't smile. You can clean the cells, he said quietly, but you can't clean what happened in them. The film crew fell silent. The sound of their equipment echoed down the corridor like ghosts. When they reached cell 14B, the warden stopped. This was yours, right? Marcus stepped closer. The same cell. Same scratches on the door. Same rust stains on the vent. He reached out, touched the cold metal, and for a moment he wasn't an advocate. He was the broken man inside again, hungry, whispering through the vents to Ghost and Kodo. He closed his eyes. The smell of disinfectant. The hum of lights. The taste of metal on his tongue. Everything came back. This place taught me what real hunger is, he said softly. Not just for food, for mercy. The hidden files. Later, inside the administrative office, Marcus sat across from a new deputy warden named Alvarez. Stacks of manila folders sat on the desk. Some labeled Behavioral Conditioning Program, others, Nutrition Compliance. You were right, Alvarez said. We found records. It wasn't official policy, but certain officers ran their own tests. They logged responses, tracked refusals, even timed how long inmates lasted before collapse. Marcus clenched his fists beneath the table. So it was real. Yeah. Real enough that we fired 3 officers. One of them kept journals. You're mentioned by number, not by name. She slid a folder across the desk. Inside, a page titled Subject 14B, Loaf Resistance Index. Notes in pencil read. High mental endurance. Unresponsive to deprivation. Recommend extended cycle. Marcus's breath caught. He stared at the page for a long time, then folded it slowly. They thought they were measuring weakness, he said quietly. They were measuring strength. The confession. As they were packing up to leave, a familiar voice called out from the corridor. Daniels? Marcus turned. An older man in a correctional uniform approached, his hair gray, his gait slow. It was Officer Miller, one of the guards from the experiment years ago. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was heavy. You remember me? Miller said. I remember the laugh, Marcus replied. The old guard sighed. I was part of it. I won't lie. Back then we thought the loaf was discipline, not torture. But watching what it did to you men, I knew it went too far. Marcus studied him. The years had dulled the arrogance in the man's eyes. Why'd you do it? He asked. Because it was easy. Because nobody outside cared. And because when you're surrounded by walls long enough, you start thinking cruelty is normal. For a long time Marcus said nothing. Then he held out his hand. Then maybe today's the first time you do something right. Miller hesitated, then shook it, a gesture that closed a decade of pain with a single touch. The final testimony. In the final scene of the documentary, Marcus stood alone in the old dining hall, now converted into a training center for young correctional officers. He faced the camera and spoke directly. This isn't about revenge. It's about remembrance. Because the system doesn't change when you hide the truth, it changes when you face it. He paused, his voice steady. To the men still inside these walls, your hunger meant something. Every day you survived was proof they couldn't take everything. He took a deep breath. And to the people outside, don't look away. Because silence is the meal the system feeds on most. The camera held on his face as the room grew quiet. The sound of a distant gate closing echoed softly, like a heartbeat fading away. The exit. When Marcus finally stepped back outside the prison gates, the sun broke through the fog for the first time all day. He looked back one last time, then whispered, "I came in hungry. I'm leaving full." He walked down the long road toward the van, his shadow stretching far behind him. No chains. No clipboard. Just peace. The frame fades to black. Filming for The Loaf, inside Pelican Bay's hidden experiment, concluded in 2025. The documentary's release sparked national calls to investigate solitary confinement food policies in multiple states. Then the screen cuts to one final quote from Marcus. "The strongest hunger is not for food. It's for dignity." Fade out. The aftershock. The documentary aired on a cold January night. Millions watched. Some cried. Some turned the channel. But everyone remembered one image: Marcus standing in that empty cell saying, "You can control a man's food but not his hunger for dignity." Within hours the video spread online. Clips hit social media. Hashtags lit up. Former inmates began sharing their own stories, each one echoing the same pain, the same gray loaf, the same silence. News anchors debated whether the practice was discipline or degradation. Politicians called for hearings. And for the first time in decades, the public looked at solitary confinement not as a punishment, but as a wound. Marcus didn't expect fame. He just wanted truth. But truth, once it's out, doesn't stop moving. Within weeks, invitations came: universities, conferences, interviews. They wanted to hear the man who survived the loaf. Yet behind every handshake, Marcus felt a quiet guilt. Because for every person clapping, there were 100 men still locked away, still staring at the same gray tray. The letters. Each morning his small mailbox overflowed. Letters from strangers. From mothers of inmates. From correctional officers who'd quit their jobs. One caught his eye, the handwriting sharp and deliberate. "You don't know me, but my brother was in the SHU with you. He didn't make it out. Your story gave my family the closure we never got. Thank you." Marcus held that letter for a long time. It reminded him that survival carried a price. Memory. The critics. Then came the backlash. Some guards' unions called him a liar. Officials claimed the footage was dramatized. They said the loaf was nutritionally complete. They said punishment was a necessary deterrent. Marcus didn't fight them with anger. He fought them with facts: court records, medical logs, testimony from former staff. The more they denied, the more truth surfaced. What began as a film became a movement. The turning tide. By mid-year, California officially banned punitive food restrictions in all state prisons. New York and Illinois followed. The Department of Justice opened a quiet review. And for the first time in history, the words "Nutriloaf" and "cruelty" appeared in the same federal sentence. Marcus sat alone one night, reading the news on his phone. He smiled softly and whispered, "We did it, Ghost. We finally did it." The weight of peace. Freedom had finally come with purpose. But peace was harder. Marcus still woke before dawn, the same hour guards used to slide trays through slots. He'd sit by the window, drink coffee, and listen to silence. Old habits lingered like shadows. The classroom. One afternoon he visited a juvenile detention center to speak. The room was full of kids, restless, skeptical, curious. He told them about hunger, about choice, about how strength isn't in fists but in endurance. When he finished, a boy in the back raised his hand. "Did they ever say sorry?" Marcus paused. "No, they didn't. But forgiveness isn't for them, it's for me." The room went silent. That was the moment he realized his story wasn't about the loaf anymore. It was about healing. The dream. That night, Marcus dreamed of Pelican Bay again, but this time it was empty. No guards. No shouting. Just rows of open doors. He walked down the corridor and every cell whispered the same word: enough. He woke with tears in his eyes, whispering it back. Enough. The memorial. Months later, he returned to Crescent City for a small ceremony outside the prison. A plaque was unveiled, reading, "To those who endured hunger in silence, may their voices never fade." Marcus placed a piece of bread beneath it, soft, white, fresh. He smiled. This time it's a meal of choice. The last word. Years passed. Marcus's hair turned gray, but his voice stayed steady. He spent his final years mentoring ex-inmates, helping them rebuild their lives one job, one meal, one sunrise at a time. On his last recorded interview, a journalist asked, "Mr. Daniels, after everything, do you still believe people can change?" He leaned back, eyes calm. People don't change from punishment. They change from being reminded they're still people. He paused, smiling faintly. I learned that in a cell built to erase me. The interviewer asked one final question. What would you say to that young man who once sat in Pelican Bay with the loaf in front of him? Marcus looked straight ahead. I'd tell him, eat what you must, survive what you can, but never let them feed on your spirit. He stood, shook the journalist's hand and walked out of frame. Legacy. Marcus read, Daniels died peacefully in 2042. His foundation, The Hunger Within, continues to advocate for humane treatment of inmates across the world. Because hunger was never the enemy. Indifference was. The final line appears on screen. He survived the loaf. And in doing so he fed the world with truth. Fade to silence.